Carl Jung's most unsettling insight wasn't about mental illness or trauma. It was about the people who could perceive what others completely missed, and how this rare ability, rather than elevating them, often ruined them. These individuals weren't broken. They were operating with an advanced psychological radar, Jung termed differentiated perception. In his clinical observations, Jung encountered patients who could instantly detect deception, intuit hidden emotions, and read between the lines of social interaction. They picked up on what was left unsaid, what was repressed, what was unconsciously projected, and they did it with unnerving accuracy. These weren't mere guesses or hunches. Jung verified their insights through follow-up questions and found them uncannily precise. These people weren't delusional or psychotic. Rather, they were highly conscious, too conscious, in fact, for their own psychological safety. According to Jung, this kind of perception wasn't a blessing. It was a burden, often leading to emotional exhaustion, interpersonal conflict, and profound loneliness. Why? Because seeing through people's social masks often made others deeply uncomfortable. They were perceived as invasive even when they said nothing. Just by being in the room, they disrupted the fragile unconscious agreements that held groups together. Jung found one particular case, especially revealing a woman he treated in 1913 during his own turbulent split from Freud. She was an introverted intuitive, a type he would later classify as the rarest of all in his typology system. She could sense the emotional climate of a room the moment she walked in, who was anxious, who was harboring resentment, who was silently suffering. Her problem wasn't mental instability, it was too much awareness. She couldn't engage in small talk or maintain friendships, not because she didn't want to, but because people felt seen in a way they didn't consent to. Her presence inadvertently exposed what they were trying to keep hidden even from themselves. Jung documented that she often spoke about people with a kind of eerie precision, as if she had access to their innermost thoughts. When he cross-checked her perceptions with external evidence, he was shocked to find how accurate she was. This led Jung to a haunting realization: the problem wasn't with the seer. The problem was society's inability to tolerate being truly seen. These individuals became psychological mirrors, and most people couldn't stand the reflection. This, Jung explained, is why such people often end up misunderstood, scapegoated, or even vilified. He coined the term participation mystique to describe how such perceptive people unconsciously absorb not just what's being said or done, but the very emotional undercurrents of the collective psyche. Their finely tuned sensitivity was like an antenna picking up not just conscious signals, but unconscious static, often to the point of overwhelm. Modern research by psychologists like Dr. Elaine Aron has affirmed Jung's early findings, showing that about 20% of the population are highly sensitive persons. But Jung's focus was even narrower, the 1% with differentiated intuitive function. These weren't just sensitive, they were perceptually advanced, able to track deep unconscious patterns that others couldn't see at all. These rare individuals had what Jung referred to as differentiated intuition, a refined function of perception that enabled them to pick up on subtle cues beyond the grasp of the average person. They could see the emotional truth behind forced smiles, the fear behind arrogance, the grief behind anger. But this gift came with a staggering psychological cost. Jung warned that when perception becomes too clear, when the unconscious becomes too conscious, the individual risks becoming alienated, not just from others, but from their own identity. These individuals often found themselves at odds with society. They were frequently accused of being too intense, too negative, or too analytical, when all they were doing was reflecting what others refused to face. They weren't stirring the pot. They were naming what was already boiling beneath the surface. Jung observed this over and over in his clinical work. When his patients gently pointed out hidden emotions or offered compassionate observations, they were met with anger or rejection. This wasn't because they were wrong, it was because they were right. Jung saw this as a kind of psychological defense mechanism. People would rather attack the mirror than look at their own shadow. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But for most people, it's easier to lash out than to look inward." As a result, highly perceptive individuals often became the designated scapegoats in family social circles and organizations. They were labeled as troublemakers or overthinkers, not because they caused problems, but because they revealed them. Jung called this the scapegoat phenomenon, a social dynamic, where one person becomes the repository for everything a group doesn't want to confront. This psychological pattern repeated so consistently in Jung's work that he began categorizing different subtypes of these introverted, intuitive individuals. He identified 4 main variations, each with its own challenges and strengths. The first was the feeling intuitive, someone whose perception was so emotionally charged that they often couldn't distinguish between their own feelings and those they had absorbed from others. They were emotional sponges, soaking up the unresolved grief, anger, or fear in their environment. Jung wrote that these people lived in a state of emotional contagion, constantly battling feelings that weren't entirely their own. The second subtype was the thinking intuitive, someone who processed psychological content through a rational lens. These individuals could detect patterns and predict outcomes with astonishing accuracy. Jung observed that they often foresaw personal and societal breakdowns long before anyone else, not through data or logic, but through unconscious pattern recognition. They might know that a relationship would fail or that a leader would fall from grace, even when everything looked fine on the surface. This foresight, however, often made them seem cold, overly critical, or detached. The third subtype was the sensation intuitive. These individuals experienced psychological perception physically. They would feel tension in their bodies when someone was lying or sense illness before symptoms appeared. Their own physical responses became diagnostic tools for understanding the emotional states of others. Jung noted that they served as early warning systems for emotional or physical crises in their environments. The fourth and rarest subtype that Jung documented was what he called the pure intuitive. These individuals possessed introverted intuition, paired with what Jung described as an undifferentiated auxiliary function. Unlike the other types, they weren't grounded by a strong secondary mode of perception, like sensation thinking or feeling. Instead, they received vast amounts of unconscious data all at once, without an internal system to filter or structure it. This constant psychic bombardment often left them in a state of confusion, overwhelm, and perceptual overload. Jung observed that these individuals frequently struggled to communicate their insights. Not because they lacked clarity of vision, but because their internal experience was so complex and nonlinear that conventional language failed them. They saw everything, but didn't always know what to do with what they saw. They lived in a fog of meaning, a psychological soup where emotion, image, and intuition mingled in ways that defied logical explanation. To others, they might seem vague or spacey, but in truth, they were processing more unconscious material than most people encounter in a lifetime. Jung described them as dwellers at the edge of collective awareness, absorbing impressions from the psyche of humanity itself. Without the tools for integration, this extraordinary sensitivity became more of a curse than a gift. Recognizing your subtype is essential because each intuitive type must undertake a unique form of integration to avoid collapse. Jung warned that failing to integrate such perception could result in significant psychological danger. He identified 3 main threats that consistently emerged in these cases. The first was collective unconscious disruption. Highly perceptive individuals, simply by being themselves, challenge the unspoken social norms and collective delusions that keep systems stable. Their presence alone threatens the shared fictions that groups use to maintain cohesion. Jung wrote, "The more clearly one sees, the more invisible one becomes to those committed to the unconscious script." The second danger was psychological isolation. This isolation was not merely physical or emotional, it was existential. These individuals lived with a consciousness that set them apart from the world. They saw too much, felt too deeply, and knew too clearly. And because most people could not or would not engage on that level, the perceptive individual often felt like an alien in their own culture. Jung described it as a loneliness born not of pride, but of perception. It wasn't that they didn't want connection, it's that their level of awareness made authentic connection incredibly rare. The third and most dangerous risk was identity dissolution. This occurs when the boundary between self and other dissolves under the weight of constant psychic absorption. Jung observed that these people often took on emotions, thoughts, and even physical sensations that were not their own. Over time, this led to what he termed participation mystique, a state where the self becomes entangled in the unconscious material of the environment. Left unaddressed, this could lead to what Jung called psychological annihilation, a complete breakdown of individual identity. The person loses track of who they are because they are constantly living inside the emotional atmosphere of everyone else. To combat this, Jung developed his method of individuation, a structured psychological process for reclaiming one's identity while maintaining perceptive capacity. Individuation wasn't about dulling the senses, it was about strengthening the self so that the perception could be used constructively rather than destructively. The first phase of Jung's individuation process was called recognition and differentiation. This step involved helping the individual discern which psychological material belonged to them and which belonged to others. For someone with highly differentiated perception, this wasn't easy. They had been absorbing the emotional content of rooms, relationships, and even cultural moods for so long that their own voice was buried beneath a mountain of noise. Jung emphasized the need for regular solitude, not escapism, but intentional silence, where unconscious content could settle. This psychic digestion allowed the intuitive person to begin separating their own authentic experience from the psychic residue of others. Jung called this ability conscious discrimination. It was a foundational skill for anyone gifted with superior perception. Without it, the perceptive individual would forever be at the mercy of others' shadows, traumas, and projections. He wrote, "The first task of consciousness is not to see more, but to know what one is seeing and who it belongs to." The second phase of individuation was shadow integration. Jung discovered that those who could see deeply into others' unconscious were often least aware of their own. Ironically, the very act of seeing others clearly could become a defense mechanism, a way of avoiding what lay hidden within the self. Jung believed that only by confronting your own shadow, your capacity for arrogance, manipulation, neediness, cruelty, could you develop the humility and psychological clarity necessary to hold others' shadows without judgment or projection. He famously wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Shadow integration wasn't about guilt, it was about wholeness. The goal wasn't to eliminate the dark parts of the psyche, but to accept them, to integrate them into conscious identity. Only then could the perceptive individual move beyond being a mirror and become a guide. The third phase was conscious participation. Here the individual learned how to engage with others without losing themselves. They practiced what Jung called container function, the capacity to hold unconscious material without being flooded by it. This was the key distinction between those who were destroyed by their perception and those who were transformed by it. The goal was not to become cold or detached, but to remain anchored in one's own identity while interacting with others' emotional landscapes. Jung described this as the emergence of the individuated person, someone who could serve as a bridge between the conscious and unconscious realms, not through dominance or superiority, but through grounded presence. These individuals didn't preach or impose, they simply embodied integration, and by doing so, created space for others to do the same. Jung found real-world examples to illustrate this transformation. He compared two historical figures, who both possessed superior perception, Friedrich Nietzsche and Meister Eckhart. Nietzsche, despite his philosophical brilliance, failed to integrate his insights. He became consumed by his perception, ultimately leading to his psychological collapse. Jung noted that Nietzsche remained identified with his superior function. He saw clearly, but lacked the balance and humility to hold what he saw. His intellect outpaced his integration, turning his insight into a weapon rather than a tool for healing. By contrast, Meister Eckhart exemplified successful integration. As a mystic, Eckhart also perceived deep unconscious truths. But instead of using his vision to condemn, he used it to guide. He spoke with compassion, offering his wisdom, gently inviting others into deeper awareness rather than overwhelming them with it. Jung praised Eckhart's conscious humility, his ability to hold powerful perception lightly as a gift to be shared, not a weapon to be wielded. Jung's personal journey mirrored the path he outlined for others. Between 1913 and 1919, he endured what he described as a psychological descent into the unconscious, a period he chronicled in the Red Book. During this time, he was flooded with archetypal imagery, voices, and visions that nearly broke him. Jung later admitted that he was on the brink of psychosis. What saved him wasn't a retreat into rationality, but the very process he would later teach to his patients, individuation. By applying his own methods, solitude, self-reflection, active imagination, he began to make sense of the chaos. He found structure within the symbolic and meaning within the mystery. This period didn't make Jung less perceptive, it made him more integrated. He emerged with a deeper understanding of how extraordinary perception can either destroy or transform a person. It wasn't about turning the volume down, it was about learning how to listen without being drowned by what you hear. This is why Jung emphasized the need for what he called the few who understand. For individuals with differentiated perception, isolation is inevitable unless they find others capable of witnessing them without fear. He identified 3 categories of relationships that are vital for psychological survival. Type 1 fellow individuated individuals. These are rare connections where both people have undergone the individuation process. Jung wrote that when these individuals meet, there is instant recognition. No masks, no need to explain, just resonance. These bonds are intense, often lifelong, and provide a psychological sanctuary for authenticity. Type 2. Those actively engaged in their own individuation. These people may not have the same depth of perception, but they value it. They're open to inner work, to uncomfortable truths, to psychological complexity. Jung wrote, "Those who have begun to know themselves can bear to be known by others." These individuals might be found in spiritual communities, therapeutic circles, or creative spaces where authenticity is nurtured. Type 3. Natural containers. These individuals may not be perceptive themselves, but they have emotional depth, psychological stability, and a natural capacity to hold space. They are the elders, the mentors, the listeners who don't flinch in the face of truth. Jung believed these people play a crucial support role, offering grounding to those who might otherwise drift into psychological overwhelm. To identify these people, Jung proposed what he called the recognition process. Ask yourself, do they respond to your insights with curiosity or defensiveness? Can they hold contradiction without collapsing into shame? Do they reflect on what you share instead of deflecting it? Are they emotionally stable in the face of discomfort? If yes, they may be a safe container for your truth. If not, revealing your full perceptual depth could backfire, leading not to connection, but to rejection or scapegoating. But even with these relationships, Jung taught that caution is essential. He developed what he termed the gradual revelation protocol. Start small. Offer gentle observations. Notice their responses. Increase depth only as they demonstrate capacity. And above all, never present insights as absolute truths. Frame them as offerings, invitations to explore, not conclusions to defend. Jung emphasized that the goal for the highly perceptive individual is not to be universally understood, but to find the few who can engage with perception as a meaningful tool, not as a threat. He believed that when superior perception is integrated with humility, restraint, and conscious intention, it becomes cultural medicine. It serves both personal development and the evolution of collective consciousness. That's why Jung saw individuation as more than just a personal journey. It was a moral responsibility. He argued that the person who sees deeply into the unconscious bears a kind of ethical obligation not to impose their vision, but to develop the maturity required to carry it wisely. Without this development, the gift becomes a burden. But with it, the same perception that once isolated them can become the very thing that heals and guides others. To frame this more clearly, Jung outlined 4 key stages of transformation for individuals with highly differentiated perception. Stage 1. Recognition without overwhelm. This stage is about owning the gift, acknowledging that what you perceive is real, valid, and important, without being crushed by the weight of it. Jung called this conscious acceptance of the superior function. It's the point at which you stop gaslighting yourself and start realizing that your observations are not imagination, they're insight. He wrote, "The beginning of wisdom is the recognition of what one actually is, not what one wishes to be or fears to be." Stage 2. Integration without isolation. At this stage, you begin using your perceptive abilities without withdrawing from the world. Many intuitive types are tempted to retreat permanently, cutting ties with the unconscious masses. But Jung warned that this is not individuation, it's avoidance. Real growth happens when you stay engaged with the world, but from a grounded, conscious place. He called this social individuation, becoming fully yourself while maintaining authentic connection. Stage 3. Service without sacrifice. This stage marks the point where perception becomes a gift you share rather than a burden you carry alone. Jung emphasized that integrated perception allows you to help others without depleting yourself. You are no longer trying to save everyone. You recognize that your role is not to fix, but to reflect and hold space for transformation. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and then to offer that authentic self in service of the whole." Stage 4. Legacy without attachment. In the final stage, you use your perception to contribute to collective consciousness, but without needing acknowledgement or validation. Jung called this the transcendent function. Here, your insights become seeds offered without insistence, given without ego. The integrated individual continues their inner work while contributing to the outer world, not from a place of superiority, but from grounded participation in humanity's evolution. At every stage, the emphasis is not on perfection, but on presence. Jung made it clear that psychological integration is not a finish line, but a living practice, a continual return to self-awareness and inner alignment, especially in a world that constantly tries to pull you away from both. Despite the potential for transformation, Jung remained keenly aware of the many ways highly perceptive individuals could derail their own development. He identified several common pitfalls that tend to sabotage the individuation process, turning a gift into a psychological trap. The first and perhaps most seductive is the inflation trap. This occurs when a person begins to identify with their superior function, believing they are inherently wiser or more evolved than others. Jung warned extensively against this danger. When the ego merges with the archetype of the seer or savior, the result is psychological inflation. The person becomes convinced that they possess exclusive insight, which distances them from others and cuts them off from necessary feedback. Jung referred to this as being possessed by the function, meaning the perception no longer serves consciousness, it dominates it. This often manifests as preaching judgment or self-righteous withdrawal. The person starts seeing everyone else as blind, stupid, or beneath them. They forget that insight doesn't make one better, it makes one more responsible. Jung cautioned, The moment one believes oneself to be the bearer of absolute truth, one has fallen into unconscious possession by the very forces one seeks to understand. The second trap is withdrawal disguised as wisdom. Many perceptive people, after encountering repeated rejection or misunderstanding, begin to believe that disengaging from society is a sign of their spiritual superiority. They say things like, "People just aren't ready for me," or "I don't belong in this world." While the pain of isolation is real, Jung insisted that individuation requires engagement, not escape. The goal is not to transcend the world by abandoning it, but to remain present and participate from a conscious place. Jung wrote, "The hermit who withdraws from life has not transcended it, but has been defeated by it." True transformation involves staying connected even when it's hard and learning how to maintain inner clarity amid external confusion. The third pitfall is what Jung called the helper's haze. This happens when the individual becomes addicted to being needed. They use their perception not for self-awareness or collective growth, but to maintain a sense of identity through constant emotional caretaking. They begin to define themselves entirely through their ability to help others. Over time, this can lead to burnout, resentment, and a loss of personal boundaries. Jung warned, when perception becomes identity, the person disappears behind the function. Instead of becoming whole, they become a role, a mirror for everyone else's pain, with no space for their own needs or development. The fourth danger is the return of overwhelm. Even those who've successfully integrated their perception can regress, especially during times of stress, trauma, or transition. The boundaries they've built start to weaken, and they find themselves once again absorbing others' unconscious material, feeling fragmented and overloaded. Jung emphasized that individuation isn't a one-time achievement. It's a lifelong process that requires continuous conscious maintenance. Despite the potential for profound transformation, Carl Jung cautioned that individuals with highly differentiated perception often fall prey to psychological pitfalls that sabotage their evolution. Without vigilant self-awareness and conscious maintenance, even those well along the path of individuation can regress into unhealthy patterns. Jung documented these derailments not to condemn, but to offer guardrails so that those walking this narrow path wouldn't be devoured by the very gift that could elevate them. The first and most alluring danger is what Jung called the inflation trap. This occurs when a person begins to identify with their superior function, mistaking deep perception for personal superiority. In this state, the ego merges with the archetype of the seer, the healer, or worse, the savior. They start believing they're the only one who truly understands reality, and this belief isolates them even further. They cease engaging in dialogue and begin broadcasting monologues, truth as they see it, with no room for alternative perspectives. Jung warned that psychological inflation is one of the most dangerous states a human can enter, because it feels like insight, but functions like delusion. The danger, he wrote, is that the ego identifies with the archetype, leading to an inflation that cuts the individual off from human relationships. Once cut off, they become what Jung described as possessed by the function, enslaved by their own perception. Their insights are no longer in service of consciousness. They are used to dominate, shame, or assert authority over others. The second trap is justified withdrawal, or what Jung called defeat masquerading as transcendence. This occurs when the perceptive person becomes so disillusioned with society that they convince themselves to retreat permanently. They claim the world is too unconscious, too ignorant, too toxic, so they isolate themselves entirely. Jung understood the temptation, but he insisted that individuation was never meant to be a solitary escape. It was a call to conscious engagement. The true individuated person does not reject the world. They return to it with greater clarity and compassion. He wrote, "The hermit who withdraws from life has not transcended it, but has been defeated by it." True evolution demands participation. Yes, discernment is necessary. Not every space is safe. But the solution is not total exile. It's intentional presence. Finding the right people, the right role, the right distance, not disappearing. The third pitfall is the helper's haze, a pattern where perception becomes a source of identity through constant caretaking. These individuals see others' pain so clearly that they unconsciously begin to define themselves by how much they can help fix or rescue. Over time, their boundaries erode. They become emotional dumpsters for everyone else's suffering, leaving no room for their own development. Jung warned that this is not individuation, it's a sacrifice of the self to maintain the illusion of usefulness. When perception becomes identity, Jung wrote, the person disappears behind the function. They may be admired, praised, even depended upon, but they are no longer seen for who they are. Their own needs vanish under the weight of endless emotional labor. The fourth and final danger is the return of overwhelm. Even individuals who have successfully integrated their perception can be pulled back into chaos during times of trauma, stress, or significant life transitions. The boundaries they worked so hard to build begin to weaken. They start absorbing emotional content from others. Again, dreams become disturbed, thoughts, clouded moods swing without explanation. Jung noted this regression is not failure, it is a reminder. Integration is not a one-time achievement, it is a practice, a daily act of choosing consciousness, boundaries, and balance. To sustain this integration and avoid regression into overwhelm or dysfunction, Jung developed what he called the integration maintenance practices, ongoing rituals, and strategies that help highly perceptive individuals remain balanced, clear, and effective without losing themselves in the psychic material of others. These were not abstract theories, but lived tools drawn from his own experience and clinical work. The first practice is regular solitude. Jung believed that spending deliberate, uninterrupted time alone was essential, not as avoidance, but as purification. It's during solitude that the intuitive person can let all the absorbed material from the day settle and sift. Jung compared it to sediment dropping to the bottom of a glass. Only when things settle can the water become clear. In solitude, the individual regains contact with their own voice, separate from the noise of others. The second practice is conscious choice about engagement. Not every situation requires full perceptual openness. Jung taught his patients to develop what he called psychological filters, the ability to choose when, where, and with whom they fully engage. This is not coldness or aloofness, it's energetic stewardship. A perceptive person who remains constantly on will burn out. Jung emphasized, your perception is powerful, but it is not owed to everyone. Use it where it can serve, not where it will be devoured. The third practice is ongoing shadow work. Even highly aware individuals must continue exploring their own blind spots. Perception doesn't exempt anyone from unconscious biases, inner contradictions, or hidden wounds. In fact, the more one sees in others, the more important it becomes to stay honest about what's unresolved within. Without shadow work, superior perception easily becomes a tool of projection, turning accurate insight into subtle forms of judgment or manipulation. Jung reminded us, we are most disturbed by the qualities in others we haven't yet made peace with in ourselves. The fourth practice is supportive relationships, connections with individuals who can reflect reality without distortion. These people don't necessarily have the same depth of perception, but they have psychological stability, self-awareness, and empathy. They help reality check perceptions and provide emotional grounding. Jung wrote that the integrated person does not live in isolation, but maintains connection with those capable of recognizing authenticity. The fifth practice is creative expression. For the perceptive individual, art is not optional. It is survival. Writing, music, dance, painting, any form of creation allows the psychic material they absorb to be transformed into something outside themselves. It becomes alchemy, turning overwhelm into meaning. Jung, who spent years illustrating his Red Book, knew firsthand how vital symbolic expression is to the integration process. He believed that what cannot be spoken must be drawn, danced, or sung. or it will remain trapped in the unconscious, wreaking havoc. These practices create what Jung called psychological containers, structures that hold perception without letting it flood the system. Without these containers, even the most gifted individuals crumble. But with them, superior perception becomes not only sustainable, but profoundly beneficial, both personally and collectively. Because in Jung's view, superior perception is not just a rare talent, it is an evolutionary function. These individuals, when integrated, become what he called consciousness pioneers. People who perceive what the collective is not yet ready to see and who help prepare humanity for psychological development that hasn't yet arrived. Jung's understanding of highly perceptive individuals didn't end with their internal struggle. He firmly believed these people serve an essential evolutionary role, not just in their families or social groups, but for human consciousness at large. According to Jung, every leap in collective awareness begins with a few individuals who can see what the majority cannot. These are the ones who perceive shifts in meaning cracks in culture and suppress tensions long before they rise to the surface of society. He referred to these rare beings as consciousness pioneers. They are not prophets in the religious sense, but psychological scouts who detect truths that haven't yet become visible to the collective mind. Jung emphasized that what arises in the individual first will, if nurtured and integrated, later manifest in the culture as transformation. He wrote, "The individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit. The truly creative individual is the bridge between what is and what could be. However, this role comes with immense difficulty. Pioneers are often met not with gratitude, but with resistance." Jung observed a recurring historical pattern. The one who sees ahead is often mocked, ignored, or attacked not because their vision is inaccurate, but because it's premature. Society tends to defend its unconscious agreements with ferocity, and those who threaten these agreements, no matter how gently, are labeled as dangerous or mad. This is why Jung insisted that perception alone is not enough. Without integration, the gifted individual is likely to be broken by their own insight. He warned that it's not the content of what is seen that causes suffering, but the inability to carry it with wisdom, boundaries, and humility. Jung put it succinctly: "Your gift is not your burden. Your unconscious relationship to your gift is your burden." The only sustainable path forward, he argued, is to treat perception as a responsibility, not an identity. To serve, but not to sacrifice. To see, but not to demand to be seen. Jung called this final stage the transcendent function, a psychological maturity, where insight becomes offering rather than obligation. At this level, the individual no longer feels compelled to fix or convert others. They simply embody the truth they see and allow it to do its work silently or aloud, depending on what the moment calls for. This freedom comes from releasing the ego's grip on recognition. You no longer need your insights to be validated. You speak not because you must be heard, but because remaining silent would violate your nature. You reflect truth not to be praised, but because doing otherwise would betray your integrity. Paradoxically, this humility often makes such individuals more powerful, more magnetic, because they are no longer imposing consciousness, they are inviting it. Ultimately, Jung's most haunting insight was not that some people see everything, but that so few of them ever learn to carry what they see with wisdom. This is the true danger, not the perception itself, but the absence of conscious integration. Without it, perception becomes poison. With it, it becomes medicine not just for the self, but for everyone they encounter. Remember Jung's patient from 1913? The deeply introverted intuitive who came to him during his own psychological crisis. At the beginning of their work, she was overwhelmed, isolated, and emotionally flooded by everything she perceived. She couldn't distinguish her own inner voice from the unconscious content she was absorbing from the world around her. Her gift felt like a curse. But after 3 years of working through Jung's individuation process, solitude shadow work, boundary development, and symbolic expression, she transformed. She didn't learn to see less. She learned to see more wisely. She didn't suppress her perception. She developed the strength to carry it without collapse. Over time, she found meaningful work as a counselor where her intuitive insight became a tool to help others rather than alienate them. She built friendships with people who valued her awareness instead of fearing it. She learned to speak her insights gently with permission and only when invited. Most importantly, she no longer experienced her sensitivity as something to hide or apologize for. It became her superpower, consciously owned, responsibly used. Jung wrote of her transformation, the patient learned not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. This, he believed, was the model for all perceptive individuals. Not to become less of who they are, but to become more integrated in how they carry it. So if you recognize yourself in Jung's description, if you've spent your life noticing what others miss, feeling things they deny, sensing what they pretend isn't there, you're not broken. You're not too much. You're not a mistake. You're ahead of your time. The only question that matters now is, will you integrate it? Will you develop the strength to hold what you see without drowning in it? Will you build relationships with those who understand, rather than begging for validation from those who can't? Will you stop sacrificing your authenticity to be accepted by the unconscious? And will you finally turn your perception into something useful? Something that serves not by force, but by presence. If you do, you become what Jung believed highly perceptive individuals were always meant to be: pioneers of consciousness, those who help humanity evolve, not through domination, but through integration. Not through judgment, but through clarity. Not through ego, but through inner alignment. Your gift is not the danger. Avoiding the responsibility of your gift is. So don't dim your perception. Don't exile yourself for seeing. Train it, refine it, integrate it. Because the world doesn't just tolerate people like you, it needs you, now more than ever.